Action. Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm Tony Marino, and I'm a professor of kinesiology at Eastern Michigan University. And today I'm going to be our moderator for our LTAD chat. So I want to welcome you to this LTAD chat live, where we highlight key topics related to youth and adolescent activity, fitness, athleticism, and many other things, where we get a lot of voices in here to share evidence-based and evidence-led perspectives on community learning and engagement. And so I'm going to be joined today by our sight and sound engineer, Rick Howard, who's professor in the School of Kinesiology at Westchester University, and our executive producer, Joe Eisenman, who's usually moderating these sessions. He's literally on the road today, so I'm going to kind of lead us through this journey. So just some reminders: you are on camera, so it's up to you whether you want to leave it on or off. If it is on, just be mindful of your actions. You are on audio, so mind the mute button. If you're being attacked by any wild animals or anything like that, just make sure you press mute first. And same goes with the chat box. You can chat to everybody, or privately just make sure you know who you're sending what to who. And you can simply activate that chat by clicking on chat icon at the bottom of your screen. So we're going to get started. And in the past couple months, we've had some really good sessions on long-term athletic development in the school setting. We've had Mike Jennings, Athlos, talk about LTAD and physical education. We had an individual from Farmington High School in Minnesota, Doug Glay from Traverse City Central, talking about middle school and high school strength and conditioning programs. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a really good one from Bournemouth Academy Soccer on an integrated model of LTAD. But today we have a dynamic group of speakers, and we're going to highlight a K-12 program that includes what I believe very strongly about is collaboration between physical education and school athletics from the elementary years, where we emphasize many of the very basic, fundamental, foundational type of movement skill activities, in the school physical education setting, and then leading up to the sport experience or other participation activities in a very solid, comprehensive high school sports program. So I'm going to introduce our four guests who are from Charlotte Country Day School. The first gentleman that we have is the athletic director, Abe Waymiller, and I apologize if I mispronounce your last name.
You got it right there, Tony.
Awesome. So Abe has provided tremendous vision, leadership, and support for LTAD in his setting. And what's great about Abe was he was a attendee at our inaugural LTAD Summit 2 years ago in 2018 in Philadelphia. So it's great to have this connection with you, Abe, in kind of perpetuating this vision of LTAD. With Abe today also is Darnell Clark, who is a stalwart in the field of high school strength and conditioning in the United States, and very thankful that we have him on this call as well. And I think it's also important to note that he was a student of Professor Bob Pangrazi, who I believe was at Arizona State. Correct me if I'm wrong, Darnell.
Yes.
Specialist in physical education and sport pedagogy. It was essentially the art and science of teaching. So I know, Darnell, you've had a lot of conversations with Joe about many aspects of LTAD. So we're really happy to have you on board as well. And our team is rounded out with two individuals who both serve in sport as coaches and as physical educators. We have Anna Moore, who is the program head for volleyball and middle school physical education teacher. And Mike McMillan is a soccer coach in both boys and girls programs, along with what occurs at the elementary physical education level. So just really appreciate you guys being on board and participating as part of our panel. So I'm going to throw some questions out there, and we'll just kind of let you guys, we'll kind of just steer the conversation as you guys want to jump in and things of that nature. So my first question, I guess, to you guys is let's get started by getting everybody involved, and I guess we can, whoever wants to jump in first is fine, but what does, in your setting, what does long-term athletic development mean to you?
Guess I'll get it started too. Go ahead, Anna. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I guess developing like the whole athlete and like the whole child, so that they enjoy physical activity.
Like
Okay. Anybody else? Let's get Mike. Mike, let's get your perspective since you're the other physical education coach. And then
Yeah,
we'll
I
work
mean,
ourselves.
the way I look at long-term athletic development is just the lifelong love of movement. You know, that idea that at any point in a person's life, they can find joy through movement, or they can see an activity and be like, "Hey, I want to try that. I would like to do that." I'm believing that that they can do it. So, I mean, part of that is having the confidence and competence of skills to kind of make the most of those opportunities. So, for me, it's that lifelong love of movement.
Right. And as sport coaches, you guys maybe perhaps, your discussions with Darnell as we work ourselves up the chain here. Darnell, how do you think of long-term athletic development when you integrate what you do in the strength and conditioning setting with sport coaches?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like a common thread throughout different divisions, whether it's lower school PE or elementary, middle school athletics, and it's just having commonality from a philosophical standpoint. And like the two Mike and Anna said, getting the kids to fall in love, but being really strategic about it, and being conscientious about how we deliver these things, so the kids kind of fall in love with movement, don't really know that it's happening, but eventually they become adults and they have to move and they have to get out and do things. And right now is a perfect example of that. Is we're hoping that our kids and our students are itching to get out and do whatever to stay active, and that's just kind of a mindset that we're trying to instill, but very mindful on our part as educators and teachers and coaches and things like that. So to me, it's just about connecting and having a common thread throughout, multiple divisions and multiple departments.
Awesome. And Abe, being the director of athletics and overseeing this entire operation, how do you perceive long-term athletic development in your position as the person that has coaches and staff underneath him? How do you kind of envision this as a concept in your school?
Yeah, so I obviously look at it from sort of an institutional level perspective, big picture perspective. And for me, it's the framework that helps us make sense of the work that we do, right? And that's why, honestly, that's why way back in 2018, when you guys put on your first event, right, I jumped in the car and drove 9 hours to be with you guys because I felt like it was going to really help us make sense of the work that we're doing. We have a graduating class in any given year, about 125, 130 students. And out of that group, probably 100 of them have been with us since they were age 4. So we really feel like we exist in this closed system where we've got access to kids at all different levels of the spectrum, right? At all different points along that continuum. And we really feel like if we have this framework that helps us tie together what we're doing at age 4 with what we're doing at age 18, and helps us tie together what Mike and Anna are doing in physical education classes in lower school and middle school, and what Darnell's doing in strength and conditioning, and what all of our coaches are doing with their sport specific activities. We need a framework that helps us tie that together in an intentional way. And LTAD has really provided us with that framework.
Outstanding. So I'm going to go back down to Mike and Ann again. And we'll start with you, Mike, because you are at the elementary school level. How as a physical educator, and let's look at this from physical education perspective first. As a physical educator, in terms of what you do at your level, what are some of the things that you do as a physical educator that kind of contribute to this LTAD framework for Charlotte Country Day?
I mean, one of the benefits we have at Country Day is we have PE every day, which I feel like it's becoming rarer and rarer across the world. So, I mean, that's a huge benefit that we have through those activities. Our aim is really to provide a diverse range of activities that expose the children to like a different range of skills. We want to have that exposure so that, children can find something that they actually enjoy. They're not going to enjoy everything, but we want them to experience a wide variety you know, they can find something that they find joy in. And, you know, the hope is to kind of develop skills in that area, so that they can at least continue with it, or, you know, if they come across it later in life, they're familiar with it and be like, you know what, I would like to give that a try again. And I guess part of that is just making sure that the activities that we provide are age appropriate and, you know, are differentiated and they're progressive through the different age groups. You know, as we start off in JK and K, it's very exploration sort of stuff. You know, we use a lot of stories and kind of themes in the background to kind of get movement from the children. Then, you know, as you move towards 3rd and 4th grade, we use a lot of, we use like an approach of TGFU, teaching games for understanding, which is kind of developing the game understanding and like why they need certain skills, you know, putting them into games and realizing, hey, you know, what skills do I need to be successful in this activity? So, you know, we try to put the emphasis and ownership on the students a little bit more, because, you know, that's the skill that we really want them to take away, you know, that they can have ownership over their own development in terms of physical skills. So that's a big push that we do. And a second part of it is, you know, we talk a lot about mastery in the lower school. You know, often we're doing an activity and students will come up and be like, oh, I can do this, I've done it. And we talk about mastery in terms of, well, you can do it in this situation. How about if you change the type of equipment you're using? How about if we're moving, you know, if we're doing hockey, can you do it on the gym floor? Can you do it on the field? Can you even do it on like a gravel? You know, just changing things around so that they become masters in a skilled area, and not just that one situation. And so it's kind of setting that high expectation for them too, that, you know, there's always something more that you can achieve. And I think that's something that we really push in the lower school.
Great. And then Anna, how does Mike pass the baton to you in terms of what you do in the middle school as a physical educator? How do you take this journey from there?
Yeah, so for middle school PE, I think middle school is the time when the kids get into, we have middle school from 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So when kids get to 7th grade, that's their first opportunity to try to compete in school sports. So from a PE perspective, I will say a lot of like our units and some of the things that they do, especially when they first get into middle school in 5th and 6th grade, are surrounded beyond our sports that we offer at Country Day. So a lot of it is emphasized and focused on the different opportunities that they'll have in 7th and 8th grade to play sports. And those are the kind of units that we tend to like focus on offering for the kids, especially on like in early ages. But like as far as like middle school philosophy goes and that kind of thing, Mike had said something yesterday or recently about using the word like that we can make anybody be an athlete, like anybody who's like a functional mover is an athlete, and that's kind of how you have to think about it. So I'd say like from a middle school philosophical perspective, like I said earlier when you asked me to like what I thought of when you say LTAD and what that means to me from a PE teaching perspective, and it's filtering into my coaching life too, is just figuring out how to develop the whole kid, whether they enjoy playing sports or not. Because yes, the reality is that's a lot of what our units are made up of in 5th and 6th grade in middle school PE. But as they start to get older, we start to try to include more like lifelong things. We do some yoga classes and we do some other things for kids because we recognize that not everybody will play sports at Country Day, or that's maybe not what they want to do. So I'd say one of the biggest things that we try to do as middle school PE teachers when these kids are going through a lot of changes and they're trying to find themselves and figure out what they like and what they don't like is trying to make PE an experience that's really fun and enjoyable for them. And I'd say that when we had to go to remote learning this spring, we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, okay, well, like, here's our test, you know, because we've been trying to preach to the kids like the whole time throughout our PE program, like this is, you know, physical fitness is good for your body. It makes you feel good. And like those kinds of things, like how you get to decide the kinds of things that you want to do to like engage in physical activity. And here's all these different sports, but here's all these other lifelong things that you can do. So I'd say like we take pride in the kids that enter our middle school and enter our PE program that maybe like didn't love PE, but we take pride in the fact of getting those emails at the end of the year from parents and whatnot that say like, my kid never really liked PE, but like they love it now. And so I'd say that that's a big focus for us, is just being able to like present opportunities for kids to engage in physical activity and physical fitness that they find meaningful to themselves, that when remote learning and the realities of the world and life sets in and they get older, you know, they're able to take those things that they've learned that they love in PE and do it themselves without like a teacher being there for them.
Sure. Great. It sounds like the physical education programs at the elementary and middle school level really embrace this idea of preparing kids for a performance and a participation pathway, so that eventually they're kind of you know, sent into your pipeline, Darnell. So I'd like to get your take, Darnell, as the strength and conditioning coach and coordinator. You know, you get this group of kids that have had an opportunity to move in many different contexts. To kind of tell us how that maybe perhaps puts you in your position in terms of making things easier, or is it, do you have other things that you have to be mindful of in keeping kids participating in multiple sports? And how does this interact in your environment as a strength and conditioning coach?
Well, excuse me. First of all, it's just wonderful having, like Mike said, physical education every day from the time that they're 4 all the way up until the time that they reach high school. And just to give you a little context about the structure of our school, is that they do have physical education from junior kindergarten through 8th grade. When they get to the high school, we do not have an upper school physical education program. Most of our students play a sport, and that's how they get their credit. So we have a very high participation rate in terms of school athletics. And so strength and conditioning kind of becomes the default, you know, physical education program from a standpoint of movement development and things like that. So we kind of approach our program from a standpoint of we are working on the engine of the athlete and trying to make them good movers and trying to make them strong and trying to make them stable and trying to make them resilient. So we have a very systematic way of doing that, because we are dealing with 36 different teams in 24 different sports. So we have a huge athletic program, and we have a lot of multiple sport athletes. So we have to do things in a systematic way, because kids they're playing soccer, they're playing football, they're playing lacrosse, they're playing tennis, you know, and they're pollinating all these different sports. So for us, we have to be able to use constant language, which we are trying to integrate into our middle school and lower school programs right now. And, you know, it just really helps knowing that they've just come from a middle school program that has introduced them to a lot of these principles early on. And it's a work in progress, but it's just really helpful from a strength and conditioning standpoint, because I get them for a certain amount of time. We do our training through teams as opposed to a class. So we don't have a lot of time to burn, so to speak. So we have to kind of dive right in, and you know, it's just really helpful having them, first of all, be active and not afraid to go from a situation where it's a fun environment, a PE environment, into a training environment, which is a little bit more uncomfortable a lot of times from a standpoint of performance. So having them have a mindset of activity, it's just really helpful in that sense. So that's kind of, you know, how we operate and how it kind of matriculates up.
So it sounds like you have this fantastic system where you get a high level of motor competence from these elementary and middle school kids, because they're participating in multiple sports, and you have a high number of sport participants. So it sounds like the framework kind of serves your purpose fairly well. So Abe, back to you. How do you keep all of this? How do you keep this engine running smooth? How do you keep coaches in line so that everybody is implementing best practice in terms of their role in your program?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would acknowledge, and as Mike and Anna and Darnell and I have talked about this over the past week, we one of the things we wanted to make sure we emphasize today is that we are a work in progress on all this stuff. We feel like we're doing some really good stuff, but we also don't feel like we have it all figured out in terms of putting it together. And we've been actively engaged in this work in one form or another for a long time, and we've been working directly with you guys for the last couple of years. But we also still feel like we've got a long way to go in terms of putting these pieces together. And an example of that is what Darnell just mentioned about the fact that we do daily physical education from pre-kindergarten, from junior kindergarten through 8th grade, and then we don't do it in 9th grade through 12th grade. We default to this position where we feel like strength and conditioning plus athletic participation is the way that we're going to achieve that. And there are some really good reasons for that. But I also think if you talk to the four of us here that are with you here today and a number of others, we would say, actually, we want to try to incorporate more of that physical education for everybody across the board and not just rely on those two programs. So that's a perfect example of like, we're doing some good stuff and we feel like we can do more. And I think that's just an important point to acknowledge for everybody that's listening, is that we're not all the way there yet. But in terms of my role, in terms of kind of keeping the train on the tracks, I don't get to be as hands-on with this stuff as the other three people that are here with me in terms of program design or actually program implementation. So my role becomes to give them the resource to set them up for success, essentially, right? To give them the resources that they need to do their jobs. And so for me, it really comes down to a couple of specific things. One is just, I'm really intentional about the hiring that I do and that others around me do in our department. So I'm looking for people that really understand and subscribe to this model, right? Because this is the model that we really want to emphasize. So I look for coaches who understand development, right? And who are really focused on development. And I'll take full credit for the fact that, Mike and Anna are two folks that I hired as coaches who then transitioned into the PE department. So we were looking at them, right, as people who could contribute to our program in a number of ways. But I got to be the entry point for them into our community, right? And that's something that I take great pride in. We've got another middle school physical education teacher who's joining us this coming year, who is somebody that Darnell hired as a strength and conditioning coaching fellow and spent a year with us in that position. So we're looking for, I think that's the place where in my role I can have the biggest impact, is just putting the right people into place. And so I try to be really intentional about putting the right people into place and putting people into place that are going to understand and perpetuate this model for us and help us develop it. I think the second piece comes with, once they're in place, how do I support them in that work? One way that I look to do that is we have a group that's called our program heads group. A program head for us is a head varsity coach who also oversees every aspect of their particular sport, from grade 7 through 12, and anything additional in terms of after school programs and camps that's feeding into that. So they're really in charge of vertically integrating their program in an intentional way, from a skill development standpoint, from a staffing standpoint, from a program management standpoint. So Anna is our head varsity volleyball coach, but also our program head. And that group, we've really tried to do a lot of work around getting that group together more often to talk about the work that they're doing, so that there can be some sharing of resources, some cross-pollination, some getting everybody on the same page about what we're doing at every level of the program in every individual sport. So we have that coordination there, and so that the model cannot be just in soccer or just in volleyball, but across the board. And Darnell is part of that group as well, so that we've always got that. We're providing them with opportunities to get together and share resources. And then we're also dedicating a lot of time and energy and funding to professional development, in order to get them educated, not just from each other, but from outside resources. And so when you all came to us and did an LTAD playground with our group, and then Joe came back to visit us this past year, again, an example of the kind of work that we're doing to make sure that they have the resources that they need to do this work. And some of their professional development is obviously going to be sport specific stuff. So Anna went to the National Volleyball Coaches Convention this past year, but a lot of it also, in the place where I tend to push hard on them when they're requesting professional development funding from me, is let's look at some, I love the term that you guys use, the sport agnostic right, like piece of it. What's the stuff that we can do that's more about the craft of coaching in general and not about the technical aspects of your particular sport? So we spend a lot of time, a lot of resources on that piece of professional development, which I think is particularly applicable to our development of this LTAD model.
That's great. That's great. And you, Abe, you spoke to this idea of vertical alignment, which it appears you guys have got this down to a science now. So I'm going to go back to you, Darnell, Anna, and Mike. And as it relates, let's kind of transition. We were talking about physical education, but now let's talk about physical development. And Darnell and Mike and Anna, you guys can chime in at liberty here. How do you install those key points or those key tenets of physical development? So we talk about warm up and recovery, energy system development, interaction with coaches, assistant coaches, whether it be at the varsity, junior varsity level. How do you, Darnell, introduce or bring these elements of physical development with sport coaches on the field?
Well, the first thing we do, and Abe just mentions this, is that we try to do a lot of collaboration. So one of the first things when we bring a new program head on campus is one of their first few meetings, is we sit down and kind of map out a 3 to 5 year plan. And I try to position myself with that coach and say, look, I want you to view me as your assistant coach. So, you know, you talk about what you want your overall goals to be, and, you know, I'll help you try to reach those goals. So if we start off with a collaboration, then it's not you know, we're not butting heads at some point because we kind of realize our roles and we're working on this together. So that has really helped us in terms of integrating a lot of different principles and philosophies as we learn about them. You know, LTAD, this term, is relatively new to us as a school. So we're really, you know, trying to educate ourselves and implement these items for the past few years. So with that said, we have a lot of resources at our school. We do have a beautiful weight room right now, but we try to use every bit of our campus to implement training. It doesn't have to be in the weight room. It could be in the hallway where we have, you know, a cinder block wall for a long hallway. We have tennis courts. We have an indoor track. We have fields. So we try to meet the coaches and their athletes where they're at, literally. So sometimes we're running the first 20 minutes of their practice. So we're constructing their warm-ups and we're running them through this, where we're implementing the same things that we do in the weight room in the summer through camps. And so there's consistency throughout. And that looks different for each team. You know, excuse me, I meet with the coaches, and my staff meets with the coaches, and we devise a plan from year to year. We review what works, we tweak what hasn't worked. We talk about injury trends and things like that. So we gather all this data, and then we come at it at a place where we can implement this on the highest level. So it's a lot of collaboration, it's a lot of teamwork, and I think that that's really been effective in terms of training in a lot of diverse environments.
Great. So it sounds like, you know, Darnell, when you talk about this idea of collaboration in your role as strength and conditioning coordinator at Charlotte Country Day, you have a lot of interaction with coaches and physical educators, mm-hmm. and you have this opportunity, this great opportunity to kind of blend things that you would like your incoming freshmen to have mm-hmm. prior to them actually, you know, being at the high school high school level because of this close relationship that you have with the program leaders and the physical educators. So I'm going to bounce this back to Anna. As a head of volleyball at Charlotte Country Day, what strategies do you use to try to ensure program alignment and progressive development for your sport specifically? And then we'll go to Mike. But go ahead and share with us, as a volleyball coach and that program coordinator, what strategies do you use to implement LTAD?
Yeah. Well, first let me say, I'm like Abe said, it's all a work in progress. And we were discussing the other day about okay, let's sit down and think about all the different kind of bits and pieces that we've sprinkled across our programs. So a couple of the things in our volleyball program that we've kind of established over the past, I guess I've been there for 4 years now, is this whole program-wide night and program-wide practice. So within our volleyball program, we have a 7th grade team, an 8th grade team, JV, and a varsity team. And so we're all competing in the fall season. So something that we've established for, I think, 3 years now is this thing called program-wide night. And it's kind of evolved a little bit into program-wide practices. And that's just to kind of get our entire program together and align together so that the younger kids can kind of see what the older kids are working on, and it gives some of the older kids a leadership opportunity to kind of take some of the younger kids under their wing and whatnot. So, and Darnell has been there for some of our program-wide practices, but basically what this is a program-wide night is we have all of our teams are playing an opponent, and usually we try to get it to where it's the same opponent, but that doesn't always work scheduling-wise. And we get our whole program playing a volleyball match under one roof. So we have our 7th grade team, our 8th grade team, our JV team, all playing on 3 courts next to each other. When it's over, we break it down, we set up our main court, and our varsity team competes, and we have the whole program there. So it's become a really fun event. But something even further is just our program-wide practice. And I've started to incorporate Coach Clark and his strength and conditioning coaches into that for some of our younger kids, so that they see and they hear some of that common language that they're going to hear when they get to the upper school and they get to our strength and conditioning program. So I think this year might have been one of the first years, maybe the second year, that he came in there for our program-wide practice, and we had the whole program. And we're lucky and very fortunate to have a nice big gym where we can do something like this, and we can set up 3 volleyball nets or 2 volleyball nets and have this big practice together. But I'm also fortunate to have Coach Clark and his staff too be able to come in and kind of lay the framework for our 7th and our 8th graders. But then I also have these JV and varsity girls who are a little bit more experienced, a little bit more veteran right next to them, doing the same things that these 7th and 8th graders are doing. So that was really fun. But aside from volleyball too, one thing that Coach Clark does do is this, as far as PE goes in the middle school, he does this Bucks training thing in May. Towards the end of the year with all of our middle school students, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And it's basically a Bucks testing. Coach Clark, you might be able to explain more what it is. But basically when all of the athletes come in 9th grade, we do basic kind of fitness testing with them. Well, Coach Clark comes down to the middle school at the end of the year, and a lot of the kids remember it too. And he comes into a PE class and he runs the kids through all these testing. So I think we're getting to the point where kids are starting to hear the same words, not just in PE, but in sports too. So when I get the opportunity to do things like program-wide practices and I get to vertically align all in one gym, all of these kids within our program, we hope that in the next few years, they're hearing the same kind of things across the board. So, and then, this is more tactical and technical, which isn't the total gist of this conversation, but it does help just as far as common language goes. We use, or we kind of adopted a program that's called Gold Medal Squared. And it's a volleyball program that basically uses common language as far as teaching different skills and whatnot. So we have our hope is that as a coaching staff, like if I have a 7th grader that's coming through the program, by the time they get to the upper school, if I'm teaching them specific keys for certain skills on the volleyball court and whatnot, and what that should look like with their body, I'm using the same language that they should have heard when they were in 7th and 8th grade. And Gold Medal Squared kind of helps me and my coaching staff stay on the same page with that and like common language.
Great,
And
great.
just to jump in, Tony, so our mascot is the Buccaneers. And so what we do, what Anna was referring to is buck testing. And we've done this for probably, 10 or 12 years, where I come down in the spring, and we basically, it resembles an NFL combine. So we do linear speed, we do multi-directional speed, we do explosion with the vertical, we do a broad jump, we do things like that, and the kids just love it. And we're talking, 400 plus kids throughout the course of the day in PE. So our PE department operates, the whole grade comes out and does PE, and they're separated by gender, but on Bucks testing, they all do it together, and it's just a ball. It's like a fitness carnival, a kind of a modified field day. But really what we're doing is we are giving them exposure into the same testing principles that we use at the high school level to evaluate all of our athletic teams, And so what it does is it kind of, demystifies what we do, and 2, it gives them a little bit of confidence, because you can imagine if you think back to your 9th grade year and you're going out for a team and there's all these older kids and you're having to be evaluated, and there's only one person running a 30-yard dash or a 40-yard dash or something like that, and you're just nervous as heck. Well, you've just done it for 4 years prior to that in the middle school. So it just helps to kind of hopefully alleviate some nerves and understand the processes, and it's not until the high school do they understand why we do it. In the middle school, we just keep it totally fun for them and they love it. But it's something that it's a way of me and my staff getting able to reach down. And for clarity too, when Anna was speaking, we have 2 separate campuses. We have a separate middle school campus. It's about 5 miles down the road. It houses our whole middle school program athletically and academically. So when she's doing these program nights or program practices, the middle school kids have their own gym down at the middle school, but they come up to the high school, and it's kind of a big ordeal, and it's a lot of fun, and the girls really like it.
Sounds fantastic that you have this ability to go down to the middle school level and offer that opportunity for kids to kind of get some insight and understanding as to what is occurring at the high school level in terms of the importance of physical performance and physical preparation. So I'm going to bounce this back to you, Mike, as a elementary physical education teacher. You brought up this idea of mastery. And how do you, at the level or the grade levels that you work with, and you touched on it very briefly, but what are some things that you do specifically to make sure that this mastery, this movement mastery, or as close as we can call it mastery, transitions into the middle school venue? What are some things you do specifically as an elementary physical education teacher to make sure that those fundamental and foundational skills are at least touched upon?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is having those age-appropriate activities. There's 5 of us in the PE department, and there's 5 classes in each grade level. So we actually teach every single grade level. So the benefit of that is that we can see the difference in each grade level, and making sure that each grade level gets the right level of activities and exposure. And then within those classes, it's just a differentiation. We have 20, 25 kids in the class, and it's making sure that, those that are, towards the high ability level are just getting pushed as much as possible. And just giving them a range of different activities and kind of pushing them a little bit more. And one of the benefits we have is, we have, the way we link with the high school is with the program heads is that, you know, student athletes from different programs will come down to our PE class, and, you know, they might share some skills that they've done from baseball or volleyball or whatever. And to these lower school kids, they are like celebrities. You know, when those high school athletes walk in, like their eyes just like light up, and you know, they kind of walk away and be like, okay, like that's what I want to be like when I'm older. That's what I want to achieve to.
Right.
And it's just amazing the motivation levels that these students have. Is they always want to push themselves more. They always want a little bit more. And so for us as teachers, like sometimes I feel like my job is easy because they just want so much more all the time. And, you know, their expectations are constantly growing. So there's always something more that we can give them. And kind of with the lower school and high school being on the same campus, you know, we have kids go out to be like ball boys, ball girls, or go out to like to the games because they're right on the doorstep, and it's just so inspiring for them just to be around that, and it's just a huge help for our lower school PE.
Right. It sounds like such a great integrated and aligned model that you have at Charlotte Country Day. And I understand there are many things that are a work in progress. So this is for everybody. I'll let you chime in individually here, but have you ever had any resistance or barriers or anything to that effect that you have people that maybe perhaps don't agree with your framework or your model or your philosophy or the way that you do things?
You know what? I'm gonna jump in here, and Rick, or no, it was I think actually you, Tony, who mentioned that one of my personal mentors and the person I learned from, Dr. Robert Pangrazi, he actually came out to visit our school. He was a keynote speaker at a North Carolina AFERT in the fall, and he came out a day early and spent a whole day with us and visited our lower school PE and our middle school PE and spent time with me and my strength conditioning staff. And, you know, one of the things that it was kind of good to have an outsider come in, because we're all jacked and, you know, excited about the things that we're doing. But one of the things that, you know, Dr. Pangrazi really helped me personally kind of recenter my thought process is just making sure the kids love what they do and have fun doing it. That's how you create lifelong learners. And I think that sometimes as coaches that are in our silos, we can kind of get caught up in the technical and tactical and the wins and losses and things like that. And we have to remember, you know, why this platform exists. So I don't know if it's much as it was resistance, but it was kind of a reality check in terms of, you know, what we do and being very cognizant of why we do it.
Sure. So Mike and Anna, how about things like club sports? Because you have your system, and we know that kids oftentimes participate in other sports outside of the high school setting. Club sports and parents, how do you communicate with or educate, engage, work with parents or other coaches on the outside? Are you able to navigate that space, or again, are there any barriers or complications that you can share with our audience that maybe can enlighten us a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of like give you a personal story here of my like struggles and my reality check that hit me right in the face last year. With all this, I've always been like a coach that believed in starting my practices in a way that got my players warmed up, but also got their hand on a ball. So that's like been something that I've been kind of trained in as an athlete myself, and just something that I always believed in. And like as a coach, when you think technical and tactical and developing their skills, what better way to do that than put a volleyball in their hands, because they're getting the reps and they're also getting warmed up. Well, I got slapped in the face last year because I hadn't been doing dynamic warm-ups and like a good dynamic warm-up with my kids beforehand. And at the beginning of the season, I had 3 of my, you know, starters like pull a quad or pull a hamstring within practice. And I just remember our athletic trainer coming to me and like giving me the business and was like, you got to do this. Like, and, you know, so that's been developed into our practices and across our program in 7th and 8th grades. But that's just like a small thing. That's like, I'm not perfect. And it's not that I didn't believe in a dynamic warm up. I was just thinking from a different mindset, technically and tactically, trying to get my kids to become a better volleyball player while getting them warmed up. But that's just, you know, that's I think part of the process. Something that we talked about together was, I feel like a lot of us in the program, PE or athletic wise, like our goal is to help these kids become better athletes. And we said already, every kid is an athlete. And I feel like we all have the same end goal. But it's always a process to try to figure out how to bring our whole community together and align together with how to get them to that goal. And I think that's sometimes where that's hard to do, not just within your community and like your coaches and your teachers and whatnot, but also with your parents, and the fact that there are club sports and whatnot. And I have had plenty of girls that go out and play club volleyball and whatnot, and their club coach does X, Y, or Z, and it's like, well, that's great, you know, like this is how we're gonna do it here at Country Day. That's hard for me. I coach club as well, and I try to do some of the same things, and I try to integrate, you know, basic principles and whatnot within my practices and within the girls that I coach outside of school. But yeah, that's a hard thing to do. So.
Yeah, sure.
Tony, I just want to jump in here, just because being in the strength and conditioning department, I deal with, and my staff deals with, multiple sports, and club sports are a part of that. And we have, one of the things that we've tried to be really intentional about is educating our kids on, are you doing too much? And the only person who can evaluate that is the student themselves. So not talking to the parent, not talking to the club coach, not even talking to their high school coach, but trying to educate them on monitoring their own activity. And there's only so much bandwidth a human can have. So, you know, do you really want to perform at a high level, whether it's in the classroom? How is that impacting your sleep? Are you fueling yourself properly? This has been a part of this process where we're trying to educate them to police themselves and to say, hey, mom, dad, I got too much on my plate. Or, you know, Coach Clark, Coach Moore, Coach McMillan, this is what I have going on. And to just open the lines of communication and making it a safe place where we can have those conversations in a non-threatening way that allows the students to open up to us and tell us what's going on. So sometimes we just have to stop ourselves and really meet the kid where they're at and realize that, hey, we all have something to do, but this kid just had a big science test or a big math test or somebody in their family died. And just really realizing that they are human beings and they're kids, So I said all that to say, from a club perspective, I think that we've had some successes in kids realizing that, hey, if I'm going to do club, then I'm going to communicate to my coach or the strength conditioning coach, I have a practice tonight, what should I do? How should I approach this? Maybe we tweak their workout. Maybe they do a recovery workout versus something that we had planned that day. So it's just trying to open the lines of communication that I think is very important.
Sure.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike? Any quick thoughts on how you deal with parents or
Yeah,
clubs?
I mean, this only works if the parents buy into it, right? And I feel like one of the good things we do is we're really transparent. Transparency between coaches and transparency between coaches and parents and student athletes. Whatever, we have our philosophy, and like we're really clear what our philosophy is. And so as long as we have, evidence to support what we're doing, that's always there to back us up. And especially as a JV coach, often you make decisions that don't go down well. I'll take 20, 25 kids on a JV team for soccer, and there's only 11 spots for a starting spot. Timmy, who's, normally playing for his club team, is suddenly sitting on the bench, and parents are going to be upset. They want the best for their child, and they're seeing one situation in club and then seeing something else in the school setting. And again, it just comes back to, hey, this is our philosophy. This is what we're working towards. This is a JV, this is a work in progress. And we're building towards it, and this is what we're doing. And, that's the best that we can do at times, is just have that open and honest conversation with people. We get a lot of support from Darnell and Abe in terms of that too. And, especially the athletes that have played different sports and they're hearing the same message from all the coaches, it just makes it a lot easier. And I think parents really appreciate that at the end of the day. And I guess one of the benefits here at also Country Day is, a lot of staff stay around for a long time. And, I'm in a department of 5 for lower school PE, and 3 of those have been there for, 10, 15 years plus. And they've already built those relationships with the student athletes and parents from the time they were in lower school. Now they're in high school, and, that relationship's already set and built. And there's an element of trust that comes with that too. And, it's a really strong benefit for us. And, I've only been there 3 years, so I'm hoping one day to get to that point, but it's nice seeing that from other coaches too.
Sure. Sounds like you guys are making good progress here. So we're getting towards the top of the hour, and I've got one final question. And I guess I'll start with you, Abe, because you are the director of athletics. And so we know that Rome wasn't built in a day. And, you've been working on this alignment and integration within Charlotte Country Day for some time now. Where next, in terms of how you see things unfolding, where next, and how do you get there, Abe?
Yeah, so that's the age-old question, right? I think in general, the where next has to do with taking all of these pieces that you've heard about, whether it's Anna's program-wide practice or the Bucks testing that Darnell's doing at the middle school, or like the soccer coaches did this vision, mission, and values kind of work this spring in preparation for the boys season in the fall. Like, it's taking all these individual pieces and it's trying to figure out how to connect them together in a systematic and intentional way. So the next step is really increased coordination, because I think we're doing a lot of these little things individually, and now it's really about putting them together in a comprehensive system, so that, as Mike just pointed out, you do have that consistency, not only sport to sport, but or not only level to level, but sport to sport, right? So you've got your vertical alignment and integration that we talked about, but you've also got your horizontal alignment across sports, and you've got your horizontal alignment across programs, right? PE to athletics to strength and conditioning, and it's all this one big system that we can just talk about. That's not where we are, right? Where we are is we're doing really good work in these individual places, and we're starting to figure out how it connects together, and we're just trying to do that in a more systematic way. So that's the where we go next. In terms of the how we get there, I think our approach has been more along the lines of, it's been less along the lines of coming in and saying, hey, we're doing LTAD now, let's go. Right? It's not been this blanket statement where we make that statement and then everybody gets on board. Coach Clark always likes to talk about the low-hanging fruit, right? He'll come into my office and say, hey, I got some low-hanging fruit for you, right? Like, and what that's really about is, like, let's look at these places where there are easy opportunities to do this stuff. Let's get in there and do it really well. Let's let people see that, get excited about it, and then get themselves on board. Right. So again, going back to Anna's example, we can't do a program night in every sport in the way we do it in volleyball. But the fact that we can run 3 volleyball courts simultaneously and then really quickly change it around for a varsity match, like, we looked at that and said, hey, that's a great opportunity. That's a great piece of low hanging fruit right there. Let's go after that, create the concept. Everybody comes to that night and looks at it and says, how can I do that in my sport? Well, let us help you figure that out. It may not look the same, but it's created that energy, right? Same thing when you guys came in and did our playground with us. We sort of said, here's this opportunity. We'd like you to come. Not everybody came. Everybody that did come went away and said, hey, you really should have been at that. Right. So it wasn't like this mandate. It was more create the opportunity, let everybody get in there and see it, and then let the energy grow from there. And I think that's happening. So it's more, the resistance isn't so much active, I don't want to do it. It's more either I've been trained differently, and so I'm not entirely comfortable with it, or it's just more like of an overall engagement thing, right? Like it takes time and energy to do this stuff. And so you got to get people energized about doing it. So I think the how we get there, going back to the second part of your question, is more about continuing to find the individual opportunities, using those to create the energy, letting those build on each other, and eventually getting us to that place where we do have room built.
Sure, sure. Well, Abe, thank you. And I want to thank you, your staff. And again, I just want to reach out, and I can't speak enough to how gracious you guys were, you and Darnell and your staff, for hosting us a little more than a year ago now, down there at Charlotte Country Day. And it was a great experience. And I think the framework, the model that you guys have in place right now, as you continue to refine and grow that model, I think will be something that a lot of school districts can look to try to implement, that addresses many of the issues that we see in youth sport. You know, it just goes beyond, you know, as Darnell alluded to, it goes beyond sports and physical activity. I think there are other things, you know, those kids that Anna mentioned that maybe perhaps aren't pursuing a sport pathway, but participation pathway, and this framework kind of helps create this physically literate culture that we all want to embrace and push forward. I think that's the really great thing about what you guys are doing, because you serve as a model for other institutions to follow. So I can't thank you guys enough for taking the time out of your Saturday morning and sharing. This material is getting posted with all the other LTAD chats and on the LTADchat YouTube channel. So we're going to put it out there for people to kind of see what you guys said today, because it's great stuff. Could easily talk for another couple hours on this stuff, because it is so vital and so important in the youth sport culture. So again, on behalf of Joe and Rick, I just really want to reach out and thank you guys again for giving your time today. So our next LTAD chat is on Wednesday, June 17th, and that'll be at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 p.m. Western, or Pacific, I guess I should say. And I'll be hosting a panel of experts on the topic of youth weightlifting. So it should be really great. We've got a couple of great speakers, a couple of coaches that worked with me a long time ago that have a great amount of respect for, Bob Takano, Leo Totten. We'll have Anna Swisher from the USOPC, USA Weightlifting, and Kevin Simons from Alpha Barbell. So it's a great lineup of speakers. And again, I can't thank you guys enough. Really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch with you guys real soon. Keep doing what you're doing. Thanks again.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony and Rick.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Outstanding. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
You too.
You too.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
guys. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Darnell.
Bye.
Thanks, Abe.
Bye now.